There's a rule in American social life most of us grew up with. You don't talk about politics. It's personal. It's controversial. It makes people feel uncomfortable. It's literally in customer service training manuals. The three things you never discuss with customers: sex, religion, politics. And we listened for generations, while the people who benefited from our silence never stopped talking about it. The silence didn't protect us. It just left the field open for the people who were never going to stay quiet about what they wanted. Episode 4: The Culture Shift, bringing governance back to daily life. Let's get into it. We avoided the conversation, changed the subject to Thanksgiving, kept our opinions to ourselves at work, scrolled past the civic stuff in our feeds, let the people who seemed to actually want to deal with it handle it. And here we are, $36 trillion in debt, accumulated through spending decisions most citizens never understood because the system was never explained to them, and they were quietly discouraged from asking. The silence didn't protect us, and some of the people who benefited from that silence made sure it continued by making it harder to show up, reduced polling locations, restricted mail-in access, drawing district boundaries that made individual votes feel mathematically irrelevant before they were even cast. The silence was cultivated. The barriers were built in while we weren't watching. Civic literacy used to be a standard part of American public education. Not perfect, not always well taught, but present, required. Over the last 40 years, it was quietly cut from the curriculum, not by accident. A population that doesn't understand how governance works is a population that can't hold it accountable. And a population that can't hold it accountable doesn't need to be suppressed. It just needs to be confused long enough to stop trying. The result is measurable. 48% voter turnout in midterms, 64% in presidential elections, in the wealthiest, most powerful nation in human history. Not because people don't care, because they were taught, directly and indirectly, that caring didn't change anything. But let's be honest about how deep this goes, because it's not just civics. They told us to memorize the multiplication table because we wouldn't always have a calculator. We now literally always have a calculator. And most Americans still can't balance a checking account, calculate their own taxes, understand an interest rate, or explain why the wealthiest nation in human history is $36 trillion in debt, or who exactly we're paying back and why. Most Americans can name all 50 states, but can't place them on a map. Most don't know that Puerto Rico is not a foreign country, that its citizens are Americans, have always been Americans, serve in the American military, and still can't vote for president. They taught us the branches of government, but not how a budget gets approved. The Pledge of Allegiance, but not how the amendment process works. The Revolutionary War, but not what happened to the people who were actually here before it started. Functional enough to work inside the system, but not equipped enough to question it. And we were trained to keep our questions to ourselves anyway, because having an opinion about documented facts might create conflict with someone who has their own version of the truth. So we avoided it. And the 36 trillion accumulated while we were being polite. Every parent who has raised a child has already taught civics. You just called it something else. You taught self-discipline, that your choices have consequences that affect other people. You taught respect for shared spaces and shared resources. You taught that rules exist not to control people, but to protect everyone's ability to live together without constant conflict. You taught that when something isn't fair, the right response is to say so and work toward changing it, not to ignore it and hope it goes away. Those are the foundational concepts of governance. At the scale of a household, they're called parenting. At the scale of 330 million people, they're called civics. The principles are the same. The scale is different, and the leap from one to the other is not as large as the people who benefit from civic illiteracy would like you to believe. The culture shift starts by putting civic education back into schools, not as political indoctrination, as basic literacy. By the later years of primary education, students should understand what a budget is and where the money comes from, how laws get made and who has authority to make them, what rights they have and what the mechanisms are for protecting those rights. Think about what changes when a teenager understands how their school's budget actually works. When they can look at the line items and see where the money goes and ask why the art program got cut while the administrative overhead stays the same. That's not radicalism, that's literacy. And a student who develops that literacy at 16 is a citizen who shows up and participates at 26. The habit of civic engagement, like any other habit, forms early or often not at all. The reason civic conversation feels so uncomfortable in American life right now is not because the topics are inherently divisive. It's because we've conflated governance with partisanship. We've been trained to hear politics and immediately sort into teams, red or blue, us or them. But most governance is not actually partisan at the community level. Whether the pothole on your street gets fixed is not a red or blue issue. Whether your local school has adequate funding is not a red or blue issue. Whether the community health clinic stays open is not a red or blue issue. These are civic questions, and civic questions get answered when communities talk about them together rather than sorting into teams and waiting for someone else to handle it. The culture shifts when participation becomes normal enough that opting out starts to feel like the unusual choice rather than the default one. Here's something practical that doesn't get talked about enough. As the bloated federal structure shrinks, and it will shrink, there will be physical spaces that communities paid for that are no longer being used for their original purpose. Those spaces belong to the community. They were paid for by the community. What happens to them should be decided by the community, not by a distant administrative body that never set foot in the neighborhood. Community centers, art spaces, local markets, meeting spaces for the people's chamber itself. A community that collectively decides what to do with a building it owns together is practicing the same muscle that makes the broader governance system work. None of this happens fast. Culture doesn't change in an election cycle. It changes in a generation. The child who grows up learning how budgets work and why rules exist and how to participate in a civic process becomes the adult who shows up, who engages, who holds officials accountable, not out of outrage, but out of habit. Because participating in governance is just what adults do in their community. And we were trained to believe governance was too complicated for regular people. The people who trained us to believe that were the ones running it, or not involved at all. Think about that. Episode 5 is next. One council, not two chambers. 535 members, thousands of staff, billions of dollars spent annually. Committees for committees. A cleaner and leaner, more accountable alternative that actually represents the people funding it. Full episode 4 is on Substack. Everything is in Searchlight Archive. I'm Ryan. Echoes of the Cosmos. The conversation starts now. I'll see you in episode 5.